English, 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 you've got superior, you've got proficient, you've got competent, you've got vocational, you've got functional. You've then got English for the 482 medium term stream, you've got English for the 482 short term stream, student visas, all the differences. What a head. Welcome back, guys. Good to see you. If you haven't already, please subscribe below right here. Today is a very important topic, which is on English. Most visas require English. You just can't get away from it unless you're applying for humanitarian visas, tourist visas, partner visas. If not, most likely you're going to have to sit an English test. And I know the majority of applicants do not speak English as their first language, unfortunately, so it is not easy. And those who do speak it as their first language often have problems as well when they sit some of these English tests. And I can attest to that from seeing some results from some of my Irish clients. No digs to you Irish out there, because I'm sure it doesn't apply to all of you. But let's have a little bit of a talk about English and why it's important. Now, the Department of Home Affairs have made different rules for different visas when it comes to English, and it is very, very confusing. Sometimes it's a time of application requirement, other times it's a time of decision requirement. But how do you know what applies to you? Well, this will take years of experience and learnings to find out what applies to what visa, and it often does change. So it's important that you keep across what applies to you. So, what are the different types of English tests that we've got? Well, it used to only be the IELTS. Then immigration introduced PTE and other sorts of tests, so IELTS no longer monopolizes the market. So after IELTS, you've got the PTE, which is very popular. Then after that, you've also got the OET, which a lot of people take. Apart from that, there's also the Cambridge testing, which I have never ever seen actually in 15 years of experience, but it is a type of English test you can do. And lastly, the TOEFL IBT. But take note, that is currently suspended as of today's filming, and we will let you know once you can be submitting those results again. But what are the main differences between them? Why would you be sitting one over the other? Well, a lot of the time it's personal preference. Sometimes people like sitting the IELTS test, sometimes people like sitting the PTE. Now, the PTE is assessed 100% by a computer. So a lot of the time people will do preparation courses for them, and a lot of the questions and answers in the preparation course are actually real questions from the test itself. And it's kind of like a matter of you learn the algorithm and you should theoretically do well in the test. So a lot of people tell me they find PTE a lot easier than English. Now, these days results you get back very, very fast, a matter of days, sometimes even in a matter of hours. Now, something very interesting about IELTS is recently they introduced the one skill retake, OSR. Now, that basically means that if you do your IELTS test and you're not satisfied with one of the results you got in one of the bands, you just missed out. The good news is the Department of Home Affairs will accept if you do the one skill retake. Now, that means that within 60 days of your IELTS test, you can resit one of the bands and then combine that with the actual test, and you theoretically can get the score that you needed. There are certain visas that you cannot use this for, such as the 485, the 476, and the 482. But other visas, you can actually use this. This is something relatively new that a lot of people don't know about. So I would suggest that you look into that more. Now, what are the different English requirements for different visas? Well, first of all, general skilled migration is where a lot of people want to score highly in their English to increase their points. So we have this thing called superior English. Now, what does that actually mean? That means if you're doing IELTS, you want to be scoring a minimum of 8 in each of the 4 bands on either general or academic testing. Now, general or academic can be used for immigration purposes. However, certain skills assessing bodies will only accept academic IELTS. So be wary about what purpose you're using it for, but for immigration purposes, general or academic IELTS is fine. Now, superior is if you score 8 in each of the 4 bands. If you're doing PTE, PTE, it's 79. Now, if you're looking to get Proficient English, once again, which is for the points test, which is for your business investment visas and also general skilled migration points tested visas, Proficient English is if you score 7 in each of the 4 bands, or if you're looking at PTE, equivalent of 65 in each of the 4 bands. PTE is out of 90, IELTS is out of 9. So sometimes I think, well, if you're doing PTE, 65 out of 90, is that like 6.5 in an IELTS? I'll let you be the judge of it. Let us know in the comments below, actually, if you've done IELTS and you've done PTE, which one you find easier and why? Because there's always a lot of debate on which is easier, but I think in recent times, people are flocking more towards the PTE. Then we have Competent English. Competent English is important because it's the threshold requirement for points tested visas, in addition to the 186 ENS and also to the 494 regional sponsored visa. Now, Competent English essentially is IELTS 6 in all 4 bands or PTE 50 in all 4 bands. We will now put up a comparison table for you to have a look at, which will show you the different sorts of scores you will need in the different sorts of English testing. So as you can see, it's really quite different depending on each kind of test that you take. Then we have Vocational English, which is IELTS 5 or equivalent of PTE 36. And we also then have Functional English. Now, Functional English is basically a requirement that a secondary applicant will need for a permanent application. And Functional English, the definition is that you require to have IELTS 4.5 overall instead of in each band, which means you can be great at speaking, but be really house at writing, and that's fine. If you get 4.5 overall, you will meet the functional requirement. Or if you're looking at PTE, it's overall 30. Now, the good news about Functional English is it's what we call a time of decision requirement, meaning you can lodge the application, and if you haven't got your English by the time the case officer is assessing it, they'll send a request for further information, and you must provide the English at that point of time. But bear in mind, it has to be recent within the last 12 months. And there's other ways as well that you can demonstrate Functional English, such as showing evidence that you studied in Australia for a certain period of time at a certain level. We'll give examples of that later. But as you can see, it is quite confusing that we have some time of decision requirements and some time of application requirements. For points tested visas, it's a time of application requirement and a time of invitation requirement where you must need your English proficiency. If you're looking at sponsored visas, it's the same, apart from the 482 visas where it is a time of decision requirement. So you can actually lodge a temporary sponsored visa, not have your English test yet, and provide it at a later date, whether that be to the department once you get it, or after you receive a request for further information, or even at the tribunal at the later date. But don't put it off too long, because if you don't have it when you apply for your visa, the department is within their right to also refuse. But just letting you know, it can be dated after your application. But don't get that confused with graduate visas where it's a time of application requirement. The department is no longer lenient with providing your English at a latter date. They were with the graduate visa during COVID because no one could get in to do a test. That is not the case anymore, and if your visa is refused, you will have no chance at the tribunal trying to do your English later for a graduate visa, which is a subclass 485. So as you can see, there's so many different types of English tests you can get and so many different applications for it, whether it be time of application or time of decision. So my advice to you is get onto your English test early. Most English tests will have a validity with immigration of 3 years. Don't worry about what the test result says. The test result often says valid for 2 years from the date of the test or 24 months, but the Department of Home Affairs will generally accept it for up to a 3-year period from the date of the test for most visas, but not all. So always check with what visa you're applying for. In addition, skills assessing bodies may not accept it for a 3-year validity as well. So you've got to deal with skills assessing bodies, different sorts of visas. So it's very, very important that you know full well what English requirement you need. But as you heard at the beginning, English is a requirement for most visas. So please get onto it nice and early and don't leave it to the last minute.